Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Spectre here. Time for a little fireside chat on this late Saturday evening, now the 19th day of December. Only a handful of days out till Christmas here. Hopefully you guys are ready. Good to have you aboard. Gather round. Got a little bit to discuss here this evening. I guess if I had to put a theme around this tonight, might be a little bit of rebellion, I suppose. A little, perhaps, civil disobedience. Might be kind of the theme, I guess, around tonight's broadcast. So I've got a handful of articles I'm going to bring to your attention. We'll interact, have a little discussion about them as we go along here. I'll pause periodically, what have you. So sit back, relax, enjoy the fire. Grab your favorite beverage of choice, whatever that may be. Good to have you aboard. Beverly Fraser, Mary Schmitz, Coffee Lady. Good evening. Zero. Alright, that being said, we got a few of you on the YouTube side, a few of you guys on the D-Live side as well. Good to have you. There we go. Thank you for the donations of lemons here this evening. Appreciate it. I'll touch base with you guys here periodically as we go through for the evening. Alright, so one of the things I've liked starting these off with is Simon Black over at Sovereign Man does a pretty good job of kind of a weekly roundup of absolute ridiculousness around the web. I think I hit one of these last week, but it seems pretty fitting. So tonight, as per customary, I'm going to start off with this article. It says, terrorist who murdered 224 people released from prison because of COVID-19. Yep, that's exactly right. Only here in America, folks. Are you ready for this week's absurdity? Here's our Friday roll-up of the most ridiculous stories from around the world that are threats to your liberty, risks to your prosperity, and on occasion, inspiring poetic justice. So we get the first one. It says Congressman begs Goldman Sachs to stay in New York City. So I'll just lay the groundwork here for you. For those that may not know, on the financial side, Goldman Sachs, in the midst of all these lockdowns and ridiculousness that Cuomo and de Blasio and company have done, they've pretty much boarded up the city. And basically Goldman Sachs says, yeah, we've had enough. We're going to head down to Florida. Well, the article goes on to state, says news recently broke that Goldman Sachs may move its asset management division, with about $8 billion in annual revenue, from New York City to Florida. In response, during an interview on CNBC, U.S. Congressman from New York, Tom Suozzi, begged Goldman Sachs not to leave New York. First of all, let's say to Goldman Sachs, please don't leave us. We're in a desperate time in New York right now, and we need you. You're important to us. We want you to stay. In other words, we like the way you enrich us and give us campaign dollars. That's the paraphrase version. But Suozzi doesn't think New York's high taxes, destructive COVID lockdowns, and financial mismanagement are to blame for the exodus. Instead, he blames the 2017 federal tax cuts, specifically the cap on SALT deductions, which allowed state and local taxes to be deducted from federal taxes owed. And in true Bolshevik politician fashion, Suozzi thinks rage and ridicule is the only way to solve the problem. Suozzi said, anyone who contributes money to politicians who don't support the reinstatement of the SALT cap, we're going to start publishing their names. Yes, I'm sure creating an enemies list will encourage more profitable companies and wealthy individuals to stay in New York. Such idiocy. Will they never learn? Will they never learn? And who in the Sam Hill keeps electing these idiot asses? Or perhaps maybe the better question is, who keeps rigging the Dominion voting machines to allow these folks in? Maybe that's a better question at this point. My guess is we're going to find out here very, very soon how many of these people probably are in some of these high offices that probably were never realistically elected, my opinion. Continuing on. Woman sues NHS for helping her transition genders as a teen. So, we got to get the UK in on this as well. The UK's government-run socialised healthcare system, the National Health Service, prescribes puberty blockers to children as young as 10 experiencing gender dysphoria, quote-unquote. These hormones are meant to stop the natural onset of puberty to make it easier to transition genders in the future. But a 23-year-old woman, Kira Bell, has sued the NHS for providing puberty blockers to her at the age of 16 when she thought she wanted to become a man. Kira says she was not capable of giving informed consent at that age, which led to irreversible changes to her body. Hold that thought, folks. Age 16, I'm going to come back to that. Rather than evaluate her mental health in depth and discuss alternatives, Kira says the NHS pushed her through the beginning stages of transitioning without much consideration. She is now detransitioned, but still has a deep voice and other male characteristics and may be infertile. The court ruled that it is unlikely children under 16 are capable of giving informed consent for such far-reaching and irreversible changes. The NHS has suspended the use of puberty blockers for those children. The ruling also said 16 and 17-year-olds may require court approval to be prescribed puberty blockers. And that is out of the UK. Good to see you, Vernon Peterson. Glad to have one or two of you guys out there modding here this evening. Appreciate you tuning in. So, like I said, coming back to that point on being 16 years old, if they are not old enough to give consent to determine what gender they want to be, how in the Sam Hill could we ever expect that here in this country, all of a sudden they want to try and lower the voting age to 16? Makes you wonder, doesn't it? In any case, moving on. Terrorists at risk of contracting COVID released from U.S. jail. And I think we saw some elements of this happen in the early stages as well. But apparently we've not learned our lessons as it continues. So Adel Abdul Berry is a former Osama bin Laden henchman convicted of murdering 224 people in 2 deadly bombings of U.S. embassies in 1998. But now, this terrorist is a free man, because his lawyers successfully argued that his obesity put him at greater risk of dying from COVID-19 in prison. Nice to know he was eating so well in prison after murdering hundreds of people. A federal judge released Berry from a New Jersey prison in October. He was then deported to the UK, where he had been granted asylum back in 1997 before being sent to prison. Berry has now been reunited with his wife, and the two share a fairly posh London apartment. Thank goodness the government is keeping the public safe from COVID. Yup. Gotta love our government at work. Good to see you, Joey Smith, one of our super fans over on the YouTube side. Good to have you aboard here this evening. Gather around the fire here this evening. Good to see you, Light Switch, Cocoa Cats, Appreciate the contributions over on the D-Live side here this evening. Alright, well, continuing on, not to be outdone. I mean, it gets crazier. So now we're just going to redefine some words. So dictionary.com decides to change the definition of court packing. Now, where have we heard that term before? Court packing. Oh, yes, that'd be creepy Uncle Joe saying, oh, I'm not going to make any comment about that until after I'm elected. Because, if we don't like the way justices rule from the bench, we'll just add more to fit our ideology, right? So up until roughly a month ago, the definition of court packing on dictionary.com carried a somewhat negative connotation. According to the Internet's archive Wayback Machine, dictionary.com's definition of court packing referenced Franklin Roosevelt's attempt to add justices to the Supreme Court, which had previously, quote, invalidated a number of his New Deal laws, end quote. Now, dictionary.com has added a new definition, which casts court packing in a more positive light. It's a noun, the practice of changing the number or composition of judges on a court, making it more favorable to particular goals or ideologies, and typically involving an increase in the number of seats on the court. Don't you feel better about that already? This isn't the first time a dictionary has changed the definition to support a political cause. Back in October, Merriam-Webster Dictionary changed the definition of preference to claim that sexual preference is an offensive term, after Judge Barrett used the term during her Senate confirmation hearings to the Supreme Court. So, if reality doesn't support your political convictions, simply change reality. How is this not 1984? Winston? Oh, the insanity. And of course, rounding this article out, we got to give a hat tip to the folks over in the UK. Obviously, this week, if you've not seen some of the ridiculousness of our little petty tyrants and tin pot dictators across the country here, as well as in the UK, trying to vilify Christmas, cancel Christmas, Fauci, and then do an about-face, no, I never said I'm going to cancel Christmas. Now, alright, well, Santa almost dies from COVID in the UK government commercial. So, I'm not sure who is trying to one-up who here, if it was the UK over Whitmer or Whitmer over the UK, I'm not sure. But it almost seems like there's a competition amongst these little petty tyrants to see who can outdo one another. So the UK government's National Health Service released a festive holiday commercial in which Santa Claus almost died from COVID-19. Some government officials apparently thought this was a good way to try to raise charitable donations to the NHS with the message, "Give back to those who have given everything." So anyone who doesn't contribute after seeing this advertisement basically hates Christmas and wants Santa Claus to die. Shame! The National Health Service has now apologized, saying the ad was not intended for children. Good grief, folks. Where does the ridiculousness stop? I think it's only going to get worse, unfortunately. It's insanity. And we'll continue to track that as time goes on. I'm sure each week we'll try to outdo each previous week. So we'll see what happens. Alright, so outside of that, like I said, a little bit of the theme here this evening. A little bit of rebelliousness, I guess. Perhaps. Of what's going on. We find ourselves in a little bit of a lull here between Election Day and now January 6th, when these so-called electors will get brought into Congress and everything finalized, perhaps. But ultimately, January 20th is the only only date constitutionally that matters. So, we shall see. And in the meantime, well, what can we do? So the Strategic Culture Foundation has this article. Says the populist American's powder keg is primed. But will it be lit? Good question. And if you think back to before all of the COVID stuff came about, January, February, and everybody got on their high horse and decided they wanted to be little dictators and put countries under lockdown or various states under lockdown, what was going on? You remember? Remember those yellow vest protests in many countries around the world? Hong Kong, France, UK? Where did all those go? So getting into the article says, there are countless alarmist articles from the past rotting away on the forgotten side of the internet, warning us that this time it'll be different, and that the given crisis of the moment was the one that would lead to big change. Flawed humans are often too eager to cover or to overinflate information that suits them to build the exciting revolutionary narrative of their fantasies. We should always be wary of falling into the trap of this alarmism. But as 2020 comes to an end, and there are some truly unique events happening in the West, especially America, that cannot be ignored. The COVID-19 pandemic, or should I say government's strange measures to fight it, have eroded one of the major pillars of Western stability that is rarely acknowledged. Life in the West is finally becoming uncomfortable, and whether this is good news is up for debate, but it is certainly good for creating major political change. Keep in mind the key word there is uncomfortable. The most unseen form of repression is perhaps the most effective. If we look at the late 20th and now the 21st century, it is critical to acknowledge that the main means of coercion of the population of a given nation is comfort. Throughout all of human history, from the point when we first started to slap together farm implements, there has had to be some form of repression/coercion to keep the system that we call society on its feet. The serfs needed to toil, the knights needed to defend, the traders to trade, and the elite to oversee it all. This is one of the paradoxes of democracy. We created a system that tells us the people are in charge and free to do whatever they want, when in reality, society exists as it does exactly because people cannot do what they want and do not have the power to topple the system. Fancy textbooks call the willingness of individuals to submit to society coercion. Traditionally, we, not surprisingly, think of this coercion in the most blunt and obvious form that is easy to understand: the police. In most nations, there is an army for external threats, but the police have the same hierarchy of ranks, fancy uniforms, and weapons, only their enemy is you. The good news is, they don't want to kill you, just coerce you into enough obedience for society to function. After the Truncheon Club, many point the finger at religion or media as the great repressor. Many of our views and opinions are formed for us by these two factors, and it cannot be denied that they shape our way of thinking, which can and does create coercion. Comfort, though, is usually not mentioned anywhere, despite it being probably the most powerful form of repression we have ever seen. But this is not surprising. Again, this isn't to say that coercion or repression is a great evil. Without it, the complex societies that give us many benefits could not stand, and none of us wants to go live in a cave. And it is exactly this fact that very few people are willing to go live off the land, quote unquote, that gives comfort so much power as a means of control. The overall global migration trend is for those with less to try to force themselves into countries with more. thus increasing their level of comfort. The migrants may not put it in these terms, but humans, like all of God's creatures, tend to take the easy way out. Raccoons prefer to attack the dumpster behind McDonald's for food because it can't fight back and is always available. This probably has a horrible effect on a raccoon's health, but it is the most comfortable option. They become very dependent on the dumpster and would probably shriek in terror if the fast food restaurant was ever to be closed down, forcing them to go back to dealing with food that can run or squirm away. And this sort of situation is what has happened in the decadent West. We have watched the glorious, triumphant, pith-helmeted European transform from heroic and rock-solid at the beginning of the 20th century into a pathetic, rotting farce of himself by the dawn of the new millennium. The West is dying out demographically. The ethics and morals of Christianity are gone. The amount of debt has gone beyond the event horizon. And it would seem the average person of European descent has nothing left to look forward to other than pills, booze, marijuana, and saving up for a PS5. This is not a shocking revelation. Millions of people see this happening. But why is nothing done about it? Again, we have to look back to comfort. The West has lived too well for too long after the final shots of World War II. When you have a lot to lose, like a comfortable home, stable income, and the lower two tiers of Maslow's pyramid, plus a lifestyle that the kings of old could only dream of, it is only natural to not want to risk losing it all. The fear of national debt, migrant crisis, degradation of morals, etc., seem just far enough in the future that it is never worth risking the comfortable present. But now, the COVID-19 pandemic has eaten away at the West's level of comfort so much that we can only now expect to see big changes happening in the Enlightenment nations. Once the pleasant mainstream bourgeoisie lifestyle becomes impossible to live, anything could be on the table. COVID-19 measures have trounced on comfort levels. The pandemic has caused major economic shock to small businesses in America, as various shutdowns and quarantines brought the most havoc on the little guy, while leaving big Walmart, Amazon, and other major players open for business. This advantage for certain international giants has really boosted their profits during a crisis. This is not due to their brilliant efforts, but the squeeze put on all the smaller competitors. This quote-unquote transfer of wealth may have finally tipped the scales enough for the amount of Westerners who have little to nothing to lose to reach critical mass. Protests against COVID-19 measures, which the mainstream media seems unable to manipulate at present, are becoming ever more frequent, and most notably, ever more populist. The protests also have a lot of overlap with the hashtag Stop the Steal and Yellow Vest movements. With Americans frustrated and impoverished by COVID-19 measures, while at the same time there is a battle for power over a blatantly rigged 2020 U.S. presidential election, it looks as though the powder keg is dry, primed, and awaiting a final spark. The main issue is for recent history is that, as stated above, comfort has worked as a means of keeping people the world over, but most specifically in the West, coerced into going along with the status quo. Now, however, in the face of the Great Reset, it seems like the elite have lost their playbook. Comfort is decreasing, and promises of a fourth industrial revolution that doesn't seem too promising for the common man is not exactly going to woo the masses. Comfort and communism. We saw the role of comfort and coercion was very powerful when the Supreme Court gave Bush the presidency over Gore. Many people at the time felt that this was criminal, the end of democracy, and cause for revolution. Some people carried some signs around and went home. When the government just outright slaughtered the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas, there were similar feelings that this crime against the people would be punished by revolution. The same goes for the various riots in LA and Ferguson. But ultimately, no one did anything. Fundamental injustices will always be tolerated because for most people, comfort is vastly more important than justice or other moral ideals. Part of the reason the Soviet Union lost the Cold War is that simply the communist elite wanted the West's level of comfort. Blue jeans and sausage proved much more powerful than righteous Marxist positions. Outside of the Soviet higher-ups, the masses in communist nations could see on TV screens that elsewhere there is more stuff and people live better. In America, historians delude themselves that the Warsaw Pact wanted American freedom, when they actually wanted American stuff. The real race in the Cold War could have been for the highest level of comfort for the masses. In conclusion, but now we are in a unique moment in history, where there is not a blatantly stolen American election, populist movements rising in the West, public outrage over COVID-19 measures, and government incompetence. But more importantly, life is becoming finally uncomfortable. So uncomfortable that for many they are starting to have nothing to lose, which is exactly what populist politicians need to make the change necessary to keep the West alive. One of the main reasons the silent majority sits at home while radicals mutant Western society is comfort. Now things are not very cozy. The silent majority is very likely to get much louder in 2021. A highly functional society needs enough comfort to create stability, but enough discomfort to keep the population a bit agitated and able to take risks. There you have it. So, are they right? Are we too comfortable? Have we gotten a little too fat on the hog, as it were? You know, as these fourth turnings typically go. You know, we have become a little too decadent in our ways and have forgotten what it took to get to this point. The fight, the necessary fight, right? Think back to quotes from Ronald Reagan, right? About freedom never being more than a generation away from being lost. It always must be defended. I think we are at that precipice, are we not? Perhaps. But we are going to have to get a little bit uncomfortable to deal with it. And of course, be loud. Yeah. Alright, well, continuing on that theme. Another interesting article out of the Blogmire. 2020, the year we lost the plot. What is this about? Well, says this piece is the first in a series of 5 articles I'll be publishing over the next couple of weeks, looking at various aspects of our new COVIDian state in 2020. These pieces are also due to be published on the Conservative Woman website from the 27th to 31st of December. So this is part 1. Perhaps I'll bring these out in some fireside chats as they're released. We'll see. Says our government, along with the governments around the world, will shortly announce the quarantining of whole populations for a seasonal respiratory virus, which leaves 99.8 to 99.9% of those who get it in the land of the living. What is more, They will also announce a shutdown of the entire economy for months, and then, when the epidemic has actually gone, will mandate that you cover the lower half of your face with a bit of cloth. They'll do this by frightening people into compliance with a barrage of propaganda, slogans, data entirely taken out of context, and the threat of massive fines. Anyone making this claim at the beginning of the year would rightly have been thought to have mislaid the plot in their marbles long ago. But here we are, at the end of that same year, and it is precisely what has happened. Only it is much worse than that. Had you somehow been persuaded to give credence to this insane prophecy, you would have probably been comforted by the following thought. They'll never get away with it. The people will never stand for it. Not a bit of it. Somehow, millions of people across the country, and in fact across the world, were persuaded to accept it. By far, the majority somehow thought that quarantining whole nations of healthy people for a virus, for the first time in history, was a good idea. Well, actually, the second time in history, to be precise. It was tried in 2009 by the Mexican government during the swine flu outbreak, but they had the good sense to end it after a couple of weeks, after realizing how much it would devastate the country. Yet, not only do we have our imaginary conspiracy loons' mad ravings come true, but those same people who have accepted it look upon those of us who have been pointing out the madness of it all as if we were those who had taken leave of our senses. Oh, irony! Thou hast had a field day in 2020, as St. Anthony the Great put it. A time is coming when men will go mad, and when they see someone who is not mad, they will attack him, saying, "You are mad. You are not like us." To cut to the chase, we have gone and thrown out reason, rationality, and proportionality this year. A coronavirus, which posed a danger to a very small proportion of our society, but which actually has an infection fatality rate of around 0.2% to 0.26%, not too dissimilar to a bad seasonal flu, and which could thus have been dealt with proportionality, somehow became the catalyst for the biggest mass hysteria in the history of the human race. Indeed, many were so taken in by the great hypnotic spell set in motion by charlatans, with their hard-hitting emotional messaging, that they adopted practices so irrational and disproportionate to the threat, one wonders how they managed to live before this year. The history books tell of one of our great kings, Canute, demonstrating to his courtiers that, contrary to their supposition, he could not in fact control the waves. In our day, it's like King Canute has gone rogue, telling his subjects that he can control the waves and viruses, and his subjects have responded by not only believing him, but by taking any action he tells them they must do to stop the waves or the virus, including confining themselves to their homes, closing their businesses, wearing cloths on their faces, along with umpteen other truly bizarre and wholly useless diktats. Then, when the waves or virus continue doing what waves and viruses do, a wave of COVIDian logic bursts over us, and we find that it is our fault that we have not been controlled. We didn't shut down hard enough or long enough, or we played board games at Christmas. In the real world, the only thing that got controlled this year was not a virus, but people. That all went off spiffingly, or spaffingly, as Comrade Johnson might put it. People were suppressed. People were controlled. People were, you might say, owned. and by and large, they acquiesced in putting their hand to this national suicide plan. Of course, the reply that comes the way of anyone who points this out is, but if we hadn't locked down and masked up, the deaths would have been in the hundreds of thousands. To which the answer is simply, nope. Lockdown cannot be shown to have saved a single life. Sweden, by not turning itself into a basket case, failed to have the anything like wave of mass deaths predicted by the enthusiasts for lockdown. Nor did other nations that took a similar approach. A recent peer-reviewed study from France, looking at 188 countries, has confirmed what should have been obvious all along. Stringency of the measures settled to fight pandemia, including lockdown, did not appear to be linked with death rate. Let me repeat that. Stringency of the measures settled to fight pandemia, including lockdown, did not appear to be linked with death rate. Then, of course, there was this Danish RCT study, which showed no significant statistical difference between infection rates of those wearing surgical masks and those with no masks. Imagine that! Imagine that we were put under house arrest for months, made to cover our respiratory passages with bits of cloth, forced to alter our lives, and threatened with fines for non-compliance, and none of it made any difference to mortality. Imagine that this government and parliament caused the complete shutdown of the economy for months, putting millions on the dole, wrecking thousands of businesses, causing the worst recession for 300 years, and piling up a future debt, poverty, mental health issues, and reduced life expectancy, and none of it saved any lives. Imagine that we are still in this situation with people still acquiescing in the destruction of their own country, the government and media still feeding us lies, and with no real plausible end to this madness. Actually, you have no need to imagine it. Even though it is so outlandish that even the most unhinged, basement-dwelling conspiracy nut on the planet could not have come up with this. It is indeed the year you have just lived through. We lost the plot in 2020, and the most pressing question is, will we get it back in 2021? Lots to consider there. Why do we continue to acquiesce at this point? Why do we continue to obey diktats and decrees that are not law? What in the Sam hell are you afraid of? Comfort? Are you too damn comfortable? Is that what it amounts to? In any case, again, staying on that theme. So, of course, HRC tried to define us back in 2016 as deplorables. Perhaps we are. We'll see. So Pepe Escobar says, when deplorables become ungovernables. Submitted this over to the Strategic Culture Foundation as well. Says China, Russia, and Iran are the top 3 existential quote-unquote threats to the U.S., according to the National Security Strategy. 3 features distinguish the top 3. They are all sovereign powers. They are under varying degrees of sanctions, and they are the top 3 nodes of the 21st century's most important evolving geopolitical process, Eurasia integration. What do the 3 sovereigns see when they examine the dystopia that took over Exceptionalistan? They see, once again, 3 discombobulated nodes in conflict. 1, the post-historic Pacific and Atlantic coasts. 2, the South, a sort of expanded Dixieland. And number 3, the Midwest, that would be the American heartland. The hyper-modern Pacific Atlantic nodes congregate high-tech and finance, profit from Pentagon techno breakthroughs, and benefit from the America rules the waves ethos that guarantees the global primacy of the U.S. dollar. The rest of America is largely considered by the Pacific Atlantic as just a collection of flyover states. The South, which regards itself as the real, authentic America, and the Midwest, largely disciplined and quite practical-minded, squeezed ideologically between the littoral powerhouses and the South. Superstructure, though, is key, no matter what happens. Whatever the fractures, this remains an empire, where only a tiny elite, a de facto plutocratic oligarchy, rules. It would be too schematic, even though essentially correct, to assert that in the presidential election, invisible campaigner Joe Biden represented the Pacific Atlantic nodes, and Trump represented the whole South. Assuming the election was not fraudulent, and that remains a big if, the Midwest eventually swung based on 3 issues. Number 1, Trump, as much as he relied on a sanctions juggernaut, could not bring back manufacturing jobs home. 2, he could not reduce the military footprint across the greater Middle East. 3, and before COVID-19, he could not bring down immigration. Everything that lies ahead points to the irreconcilable, pitting the absolute majority that voted Dem in the Atlantic-Pacific nodes versus the South and a deeply divided Midwest. As much as Biden-Harris is bound to isolate the South even more, their prospects of pacifying the Midwest are less than 0. Who's ground control? Beyond the raucous altercations on whether the presidential election was fraudulent, these are the key factual points. A series of rules in mostly swing states were changed through courts, bypassing state legislatures, without transparency before the election, paving the way to facilitate fraud schemes. 2. Biden was de facto coronated by AP, Google, and Twitter even before the final official result and weeks before the Electoral College vote this past Monday. 3. Every serious professional audit to determine whether all received and tabulated votes were valid was de facto squashed. In any global South latitude, where the empire did interfere in local elections, color revolution style, this set of facts would be regarded by scores of imperial officials in a relentless propaganda blitz as evidence of a coup. On the recent Supreme Court ruling, a deep state intel source told me the Supreme Court did not like to see half the country rioting against them and preferred the decision be made by each state in the House of Representatives. That is the only way to handle this without jeopardizing the Union. Even prominent Democrats I know realize that the fix took place. The error was to steal too many votes. This grand theft indicts the whole system that has always been corrupt. Dangers abound. On the propaganda front, for instance, far-right nationalists are absolutely convinced that the U.S. media can be brought to heel only by occupying the 6 main offices of the top conglomerates, plus Facebook, Google, and Twitter. Then you'd have full control of the U.S. propaganda mill. Another deep state source, now retired, adds that the U.S. Army does not want to intervene as their soldiers may not obey orders. Many of these far-right nationalists were officers in the armed forces. They know where the nuclear missiles and bombers are. There are many in sympathy with them as the U.S. falls apart and lockdowns. Meanwhile, Hunter Biden's dodgy dealings simply will not be made to vanish from public scrutiny. He's under 4 different federal investigations. The recent subpoena amounts to be a very serious case pointing to a putative crime family. It's been conveniently forgotten that Joe Biden bragged to the Council on Foreign Relations, that he forced Ukraine's chief prosecutor, Viktor Shokin, to be fired exactly when he was investigating corruption by Burisma's founder. Of course, a massive army of shills will always invoke another army of omniscient and oh so impartial fact-checkers to hammer the same message. This is Trump's version. Courts have clearly said all the evidence is baseless. District Attorney William Barr is now out of the picture. See his letter of resignation. Barr is a notorious Daddy Bush asset since the old days, and that means classic deep state. Barr knew about all the federal investigations on Hunter Biden dating back to 2018, covering potential money laundering and bribery. And still, as the Wall Street Journal delightfully put it, he worked to avoid their public disclosure during the heated election campaign. A devastating report, Dems, a Republican attack report, has shown how the Biden family was connected to a vast financial network with multiple foreign ramifications. Then, there's Barr not even daring to say there was enough reason for the Department of Justice to engage in a far-reaching investigation into voting fraud, finally putting to rest all baseless conspiracy theories. Move on. Nothing to see here. Even if an evidence pile-up featured, among other instances, ballot stuffing, backdated ballots, statistical improbabilities, electronic machine tampering, software backdoors, affidavits from poll workers, not to mention the by-now legendary stopping the vote in the dead of night, with subsequent huge batches of votes miraculously switching from Trump to Biden. Once again, an omniscient army of partial fact-checkers will say everything is baseless. A perverse blowback. A perverse form of blowback is already in effect, as informed global citizens may now see crystal clear the astonishing depth and reach of deep state power, the ultimate decider of what happens next in dystopia central. Both options are dire. 1. The election stands, even if considered fraudulent by nearly half of the U.S. public opinion. To quote that peerless existentialist, the dude, there's no rug tying the room together anymore. 2. Was the election to be somehow overturned before January 20th? The deep state would go shock and awe to finish the job. In either case, the deplorables will become the ungovernables. It gets worse. A possible implosion of the Union, with internal convulsions leading to a paroxysm of violence, may even be coupled with an external explosion, as in a miscalculated imperial adventure. For the 3 sovereigns, Russia, China, and Iran, as well as the overwhelming majority of the global South, the conclusion is inescapable. If the current sorry spectacle and the best Western liberal democracy has to offer, it definitely does not need any enemies or threats. Kind of reminds me of the old quote, right? That if America were to fail, it would not be felled from the outside, but from within. We are there. And another interesting article graced my feed out of Law Enforcement Today here. Talking about a nation divided. Will some states look to secede from the United States? An op-ed And of course, I suppose this is probably something that has been penned since we saw Alan West kind of push that idea after Supreme Court kicked back the Texas case. And of course, if you've paid any attention at all over the years to what Texas has advocated for, there is a small, tireless group down there that has advocated for that. And of course, we should remember our history, too, that before Texas was admitted into the Union, that they were indeed a republic prior. And of course, there's many movements around the country as well. Places out in California and Oregon to form states at Jefferson or New California and all sorts of secessionist type movements. So this isn't really something brand new out of the box. So the following editorial is written by a retired chief of police and current staff writer for Law Enforcement Today. This is a theoretical piece and in no way advocates for the secession of any states from the United States of America. Out of Philadelphia. When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably from the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. The above, of course, is the opening paragraphs of the Declaration of Independence, presented on July 4th, 1776, our burgeoning nation presented the above to King George of England, thus beginning the Revolutionary War and our eventual independence from England. In 5 short years, on July 4th, 2026, we are supposed to celebrate the 250th birthday of the United States of America. I am afraid that may no longer be possible. This is heartbreaking to me. I was honored to graduate from high school in 1976, the bicentennial of our nation's founding. It was a big deal back then. My school established the first bicentennial celebration program in a high school, and our program was nationally recognized. In fact, we received an invitation to the White House, which was a tremendous honor. It all seems so long ago. over the past 6 weeks, and going back much longer, our current system of governance has been under attack. However, the last 6 weeks have proven that our system is broken and, as of December 11th, 2020, confirmed as broken beyond repair. This month, the Supreme Court of the United States disregarded the voting rights of over 73 million people. I say this not because my side lost. I say it because it is the truth. First, let us face the facts. If the current situation was reversed, and what was being done to President Trump was instead being done to Joe Biden, you can pretty much guarantee that our cities would be in flames, people would be getting pulled from cars and beaten, and police officers would be under assault. Luckily, and fortunately, our side does not resort to such tactics. Over the past year, Democrats have filed hundreds of lawsuits to change voting systems in numerous states, all in violation of Article 2 of the United States Constitution. Article 2, for those not familiar with it, sets the ground rules for how electors, the people who meet and elect the President and Vice President of the United States, are so appointed. That power is vested in the legislatures of the states, period. Once Democrats saw an opportunity presented to them on a silver platter by China in the form of the coronavirus, they had their chance. You see, even though nowhere in the Constitution is there a pandemic exception to that document, COVID-19 presented a perfect chance to use health and safety as a means to subvert the Constitution, and with it, the voting laws. And in case after case, they found willing judges both on state Supreme Courts, such as in Pennsylvania, and in federal districts, who were more than agreeable to give them whatever they wanted. Law and Constitution be damned. Let us face it, people. For all the unadulterated BS Joe Biden is spouting about bringing the country together, the fact remains that Biden cannot even string a cogent sentence together. For God's sake, he did not even know the name of one of his nominees, nor the cabinet post he was nominating him for. How is this man supposed to bring anything together? A tweet here says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the Democrat nominee for the President of the United States, and it ain't pretty. Biden jumbles name of Massachusetts governor, forgets what century he is in during his coronavirus briefing." This was just the other day over on the Gateway Pundit. Well, dating back to March 23rd, rather. But nonetheless, you get the idea. Says we've already seen numerous people seeking truth and reconciliation commissions, some kind of half-assed Nuremberg trials where people who aided or supported President Trump will be theoretically reprogrammed. We are talking about 73 million people. Does anyone think for a moment that if such a proposal moves forward that Biden will be able to stop it? Not on a bet. We then have 2 Georgia Senate seats up for election on January 5th. Given the shenanigans that went on with the presidential election, including in Georgia, does anyone in their right mind think that newly empowered Democrats, given the green light by the corrupt Supreme Court, will do anything to stop it? I wouldn't bet on it. So, where does that leave us? The term secession has been bandied about over the past several weeks, and as the circus of election day has turned into election week and then election month, anyone with their eyes wide open can see the direction the country is going. And we do not like it. Let me make this clear, because I do not want to be misquoted as happened to conservative radio talk show host Rush Limbaugh this past week. I am not advocating secession. I am merely playing devil's advocate. I am trying to say that many Americans are simply at the end of their collective rope. In 2008, Barack Obama said he was going to, quote-unquote, fundamentally transform the United States of America, end quote. In some ways, he did, but nowhere near where many feared he would go. Yes, we got Obamacare shoved down our throats by gutless Chief Justice John Roberts, but for rank-and-file Americans, it was not too bad, at least on the surface. However, under the surface, the Obama-Biden White House was the most corrupt administration in presidential history, far surpassing that of Richard Nixon. He used the intelligence community to actively undermine a presidential candidate, tacitly approving the phony Russian dossier to launch a Russia collusion hoax to take out the Trump campaign. However, Trump pulled a rabbit out of his hat and got elected, and the hoax, which would have been buried by HRC, finally saw the light of day. Of course, it only saw the light of day if you happen to pay attention to conservative and independent journalists. It was buried by mainstream media, social media, and big tech. Information came out just weeks before the election that implicated Joe Biden in funky business dealings with China, which was outed by the New York Post and shared once again in conservative and independent media. But according to CNN, President-elect Joe Biden will address the nation tonight with remarks focused on the Electoral College certification and the strength and resiliency of our democracy. Yeah, and then Vicky Wiltshire responded to that tweet, says, will he address his dealings with China? Will he address his son Hunter's dealings with Ukraine? Will he address his brother James dealing with the hospital company? Will he address how the entire family got rich off of foreign countries? Hashtag Biden crime family exposed. Whoops. But, again, the so-called legacy media, NBC, ABC, CBS, CNN, the New York Times, the Washington Compost, buried it. Social media followed suit, with the most famous being Twitter, which deleted the New York Post Twitter feed. Miraculously, now that the election is over, some of the media has awoken from their slumber and started to tepidly report on it. Finally, there is the tyranny of governors, in primarily Democrat-run states. Governors implement draconian, quote-unquote, emergency orders for a virus with a 99% survival rate, putting literally tens of thousands of businesses out of business forever. Yet these same tyrants routinely bust their own orders, then threaten arrest for those who do not obey. What has that accomplished? Domestic violence and child abuse are exploding. Suicides are on the increase. A child committed suicide in front of his peers in a virtual classroom. We are dooming an entire generation of children to a life of being virtual sociopaths. But very few seem to care. Another tweet here says, France, 42% jump in domestic violence interventions during lockdown. Venezuela, 65% increase in femicides for April. Uganda, calls to a women's hotline up fivefold. The COVID-19 pandemic is causing another global crisis, an explosion of domestic abuse. So, what would secession look like? Unlike during the Civil War, where it was easy to just divide the country by North and South, 2020 America would be much different. Challenge. My guess is that any type of move for secession would likely involve something like what happened in the old Soviet Union, where individual independent states popped up. One thought was to take Hawaii, California, Oregon, Washington, and maybe Colorado and let them go their separate way and take the Ninth Circuit Court with them. On the other side of the continent, take all the New England states along with New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia and let them have it. Pennsylvania would be a wild card, but we would hold out hope for that state. Perhaps New Hampshire could be divided. with the southern part a de facto suburb of Boston going with the rest of New England. Clearly in the middle of the country you have Illinois. Maybe you could just have them join up with Minnesota and Michigan and form their own little state country. That leaves the rest of the country, a majority of which voted for Trump. We would keep Texas, which is a booming state, and Florida, along with much of the South, Middle America, and parts of the Southwest. Any type of secession would also have to involve blue states implementing their socialist and utopian programs. The rest of the country, the red states, would use free market principles, low taxes, and capitalism. We would check back in 5 years to see which group of states is doing better. Our bet is on the red states. Some businesses have already seen the benefits of red states like Texas over blue states such as California. Tesla and Oracle are ditching the socialist utopia of California for free market Texas. Is this tongue-in-cheek? Perhaps a little. But there is a large group of Americans, 73+ million strong, who believe in our hearts that not only have our votes been disenfranchised but what are estimated to be millions of illegal votes, but we have in fact been screwed. Worse is that we have seen 2 of the 3 branches of government, the legislative and the judicial, abdicate their authority to the detriment of our republic. People are mad as hell. This will probably not turn out well. United States of America, born July 4th, 1776, died December 11th, 2020. Interesting take. Lots to consider. Like I said, a little bit of a theme to tonight's show. A little bit of rebellion in the air, I suppose. Lots to consider as we kind of lay in wait till January 6th rolls around and what is going to be in store. But, as always, never count Trump out. He's a counterpuncher. Sun Tzu, Art of War. Art of War. Appear weak when you are strong. We know what it's going to take to right the ship. The question is it going to be done as such? Did we pre-position troops ahead of the election under the guise of Operation Warp Speed? Or is there something else? And, of course, to go back a little bit in history here, yeah, of course, we have to consider the Christmas raid Washington did. 6 days out, folks. 6 days out. Could we see history repeat? Yeah, I see that JCD said all rumors from martial law is fake news. I hope that was a lie. Yeah, I just saw that via POTUS's tweets before coming on a show here this evening. Let's see. Yeah, he's been very active this evening about the 11 o'clock hour. A little bit of a tirade here. What would Bolton, one of the dumbest people in Washington, know? Wasn't he the person who so stupidly said on television, Libyan solution, when describing what the U.S. is going to do for North Korea? I've got plenty of other Bolton stupid stories. Martial law equals fake news, just more knowingly bad reporting. And of course, we've heard what knowingly means, right? Dirty, good to see you, man. Long time no see. So, like I said, lots to consider here. Now, this 20th day of December, 5 days out from Christmas, will we see history repeat? Are we willing to step out of our comfort zones at this point? Or have we gotten too fat on the lamb, as it were? I hope not. I sincerely hope not. Will it resort to 3%? As in back in the day? Perhaps. So, very, very interesting. What say you guys this evening? What's on your mind? Definitely different times in which we live. Motivatio para todos, only those who paid 10 years of taxes can have the privilege of vote. Well, I'll tell you what, our founding fathers had different views on who would have the right to vote. And it makes you wonder if they weren't right all along, that it should be indeed property owners that would have that right. Makes you wonder if we shouldn't retort back to that. Because as we've seen, they are happy to wheel in voters from anywhere, fraudulently, whatever means, ways necessary. I would certainly put an end to it. Oh yeah, Linwood hinting at actions taken only in the Dominion swing states. Yeah, that's possible. Anything is possible at this point. I don't think anything can necessarily be ruled out at this point. Head on a swivel. Try to pay attention to the headlines circling about. That's why I've been keeping tabs on all these swing state activities since Election Day. I'm now sitting on a trove of about 5,000 articles, which I'll probably try and get released here in the next day or so. So if you're on Gab, pay attention. I'll probably have that rolled out. You guys can go download it. And it will include the latest developments around all this Orion / Solar Winds hack. That's all going to be wrapped in there as well. Probably sitting on about 100 or so articles in regards to that over the last several days. All related, certainly. We are at war, in case you hadn't noticed. Cyber war. On all fronts. Most of the populace probably has no idea. Annette Walls, but who really owns the land if we have to pay all these taxes? I only own the house and rent the land from the city and county. You're absolutely right. You are absolutely right, and there is a way around that. You know how you do that? Couple things. Number one, you got to write your status, because at the end of the day they treat us as all infants, and we are, until we declare ourselves not infants. We have come of full age. Did you know that back in the 1600s that people, when kids came of age at the age of 18 or 21, that they actually had to sue out their livery? Do you even know what that term means, to sue out one's livery? Yeah, hidden information. Look it up. See what it means. Why would they have to do that? To take their estate. Where is our estate today? Do we have estates? Oh, you can bet your bottom dollar we do, but we have to go claim it. And until we do, we're going to continue to be managed as infants. Because nobody has claimed us or told us or taught us otherwise. And once you get that situation righted, then you can pursue and declare your lands alluvial. Part of the process. See, the other thing that is a little bit hidden knowledge that they tend to forget to tell you or teach you is, if you remember right in your civics class, right? If you studied the Constitution, do you remember how the states actually came into the Union? Aside from the 13 original colonies, as they started to add additional states, they had what was known as the Equal Footing Clause. Equal footing. Look it up. Understand what it means. Why is that important? Well, all one has to do is take a look at the 1848 Constitution of Wisconsin as an example, the original Constitution that was ratified when Wisconsin was brought into the Union. And it says, literally, in the 1848 Constitution of Wisconsin that all lands are declared alluvial. What does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean that we pay rent. It doesn't mean they have the right to tax. And guess what? If it's alluvial in Wisconsin, and all the rest of the states and everything else are on equal footing, or does that make the rest of the land of the states the same thing? Whoops. So yes, once you get yourself in a position to where you can get your estate settled, brought under your control, put on the public record, all of these things, then yes, you can go about declaring your lands alluvial, telling your county to pound effing sand because they have no right or any means to actually tax you. Period. You are sovereign upon your land. Period. And we have means and ways to do that. We teach classes on that stuff regularly. If you're interested, you can send an email to me, what have you. I'll be glad to put you in touch with how to go about doing that. Alright, so once they took civics out of schools, people no longer are educated in government operation. Yes, and that's part of the reason why people like myself have gone through and spent a lot of time going over the Federalist Papers Saturday night after Saturday night for months over on the soapbox. If you've missed it, you can check it out on my backup channel, or my channel for all my archives over on UGEtube under @breaking_Spectre. You can find it all by playlist there. Reading through the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, all of the Federalist Papers, etc. It's all right there. Nuance says, so you have to have it paid off first? Yeah, you can. However, there's more to that story too. And here's another thing. I'm probably going to have to do a show here before long on mortgages. Why is that going to be important? Well, as part of all this COVID crap has played out and, put people on the sidelines, declare unemployment, and lose their jobs, lose their businesses. Yes, there have been programs to thwart people from getting kicked out of their apartments and houses and everything else. However, in the stalemate that Congress is in right now, that has not been extended, and so all of that stuff is going to come due here probably come first of the year. How many million people is that going to affect? I have no idea. That being said, what people fail to understand about a mortgage is this, is that it too is based upon fraud. Period. Flat out fraud. Just like what we're witnessing with everything going on around the election. Fraud. It's all based on fraud. They leverage your credit. There is no money that a bank lends. Period. They don't have money. They leverage your credit. And so, that being said, what the bank doesn't tell you is that the mortgage and the promissory note are always supposed to stay together. They don't. They get split. They get monetized. They get turned into mortgage-backed securities and sold off before the ink is even dry that you sign when you sign your mortgage. So, the gist of the story is this. To save yourself, do not ever leave your house, regardless of the situation you may find yourself in. I would say at this point your best bet would be to begin the letter writing campaign to get ahead of it. Write your 3 letters, your 3-knock rule, as in Roman civil law, 3 knocks, and then you're out type situation. Let them know that you wish to see the actual mortgage, the promissory note that you sign, not any facsimile, not any copy, but the original, and they will not be able to produce it. Period. They can't. Because once it's actually securitized, it can never go back to being a promissory note. Yeah, it doesn't matter if it's paid off. Yes, you can pay your mortgage off, all that good stuff, but at the end of the day, you do not own your land. You are just a tenant on the land. You're a resident. You need to be domiciled. And you will need to make sure that you have the proper paperwork in order to do that. To put yourself as a sovereign upon the land, one of the people of your respective state. This is why it is absolutely important, especially now in the times we find ourselves, to get stuff like this done. Why? Because our founders intended for us to be self-governed. Not to be governed, but self-governed. In any case, we'll get into that on another day. All right. Well, Spicy Dame, if they try to kick you out, ask the bank to produce the deed. They don't have it. Mortgages change hands too many times. Go down to your county recorder's office. Make sure that you have that, whether it be a warranty deed, whether it be whatever deed. Keep in mind what the actual deed is. It's basically a title in color of law fashion. It's not real. It's because of this fashion of Admiralty maritime law that we find ourselves in, that the deed is under the color of title. It is not a real title. There is no way to technically achieve a real title, because when the lands and that were issued, they were actually issued patents. If you go to the Bureau of Land Management, for example, look up your parcel ID. You can actually get copies of your patent for the land, and the best you can do by filing your alluvial title is bring that forward. It is the ultimate form of land ownership, by bringing that patent forward. And it supersedes the deed far and wide. There are maxims of law that state that. It's known, it's historical, irregardless of whatever BS that they put on the law books, if you want to call it that. Legal books is what I should say. So, yes, there's more to the story. I won't get into all that here this evening, obviously. Don't want to open up too big of a can of worms, but we'll save that for another day. In any case, appreciate you guys joining in tonight. We got lots to consider here, folks. Very, very interesting times that we find ourselves in. Only you know where that red line is that shall not be crossed. Mine was crossed here a couple years back, and I stood on it. I made my move, and I will stand behind it regardless. I hope you guys do too. So, that being said, appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll see you back here real soon for another fireside chat. And in the meantime, take care. God bless everybody.